This is the deadliest motorsport disaster in history. In just seconds, 83 spectators and one driver lost their lives, with over 180 more injured. Yet, shockingly, the race continued. This is the story of the 1955 Le Mans disaster, a tragedy that forever changed the face of motorsport. As always, viewer discretion is advised. The 23rd running of the 24 Hours of Le Mans began like any other. The sun shone brightly over the Circuit De La Sarthe as 250,000 spectators gathered to witness what many considered the world's greatest test of automotive engineering and human endurance. Little did they know that in just a few hours, this celebration of speed would turn into a scene of unimaginable horror. But to understand the magnitude of what happened that day, we need to step back and look at the context surrounding this ill-fated race. Le Mans, a city in northwestern France, had been hosting its famous 24-hour race since 1923. By 1955, it had become the most prestigious endurance racing event in the world. The concept was simple: drive for 24 hours straight, covering as much distance as possible. The team whose car traveled the furthest would be crowned the winner. However, the Circuit de la Sarthe was anything but simple. At 13.65 kilometers long, it was a monster of a track, blending purpose-built racing sections with public roads. The track began with a long straight, known as the pit straight, where cars would reach their highest speeds. This led into a sharp right-hand turn called the Dunlop curve, named after the Dunlop Bridge that spanned the track at this point. From there, drivers faced the S's, a series of quick left-right turns that tested their skills and their car's handling, and into the Tetra Rouge corner. But the real test came with the infamous Mulsanne stretch. The Mulsanne, nearly 6 kilometers of flat-out driving where cars would reach speeds approaching 300 kilometers an hour, just before ending with a sharp right-hand turn aptly named the Mulsanne corner, severely tested the car's brakes. Drivers would then endure the Indianapolis and Arnage corners, where they'd accelerate through a winding left and right at high speeds into the Maison Blanc chicane and back onto the pit straight to complete each lap. But the 1955 race was special for another reason. It marked the height of an intense rivalry between automotive giants just 10 years removed from the end of World War II, Germany's Mercedes and Great Britain's Jaguar. Mercedes-Benz had returned to the international racing just 1 year before, after a 15-year absence. Having conquered Formula One, they were determined to prove their dominance in sports car racing. Its weapon of choice was the 300 SLR, a technological marvel. Its 3-liter straight-8 engine produced over 300 horsepower, which was extraordinary for the time. On the other side of the pit lane was the Jaguar team sporting their new car, the D-Type, which was a testament to British engineering prowess. Having won the Le Mans in 1951 and 1953, they most recently lost to Ferrari in 1954 and were looking to reclaim their title. Each team in the Le Mans enters 3 cars, each with a team of 2 drivers, alternating in 6-hour shifts. Mercedes boasted the legendary Juan Manuel Fangio and the rising star Stirling Moss in their lead car, while F1 drivers Carl Kling and Andre Simon would man car number 2, with John Fitch and Pierre Levey at the helm of car number 3. Jaguar countered with Mike Hawthorne, a charismatic young Brit who had become the first Englishman to win a Formula One Grand Prix. Hawthorne would be paired with rookie Ivor Bieb, while experienced drivers Tony Rold, Duncan Hamilton, Norman Dewis, and Don Bowman making up the rest of the team. Ferrari was also looking to defend their 1954 title with the new 735 LM, powered by a straight-6 engine. Their team was led by drivers Eugenio Castellini and Paolo Marzotto. The stakes were high, and the public knew it. A record-breaking crowd of over 250,000 spectators packed the circuit, lining the track several people deep in some places. At 4 p.m. on Saturday, June 11th, the race began. The roar of engines filled the air as 60 cars surged forward, jockeying for position. The crowd cheered as the smell of gasoline and burning rubber permeated the atmosphere. As predicted, the lead cars of Eugenio Castellini, Ferrari, Hawthorne, Jaguar, and Fangio, Mercedes-Benz, were at the head of the field in the first hour. Going into the second hour, Castellini started dropping back, but Hawthorne and Fangio continued the duel. sweeping the lead and dropping the lap record further and further while lapping most of the field. But at 6:26 p.m., just 2.5 hours into the race, everything changed. To set the scene, we need to understand the layout of the track at that crucial point. The cars were approaching the pit stage, a long stretch of road where teams could refuel and change tires. 3 drivers were about to become the key players in this tragedy: Mike Hawthorne in his Jaguar, Lance Macklin in an Austin Haley, and Pierre Levay in a Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR. On lap 35, Hawthorne, leading the race, had just received a signal from his pit crew to come in for a scheduled stop. He began to apply the disc brakes, rapidly decelerating and veering into the right side of the track to enter the pit. But since there was no designated deceleration lane for cars coming into the pit, this put Hawthorne directly in the path of other cars. Behind him, Lance Macklin and the slower Austin Haley saw the Jaguar slowing and swerved left to avoid a collision. What Macklin couldn't have known was that Pierre Levay's Mercedes was rapidly approaching from behind, traveling at about 120 miles per hour. In a split second, disaster struck. Levay's Mercedes clipped the back of Macklin's Austin Haley. The Mercedes became airborne, soaring over the bank separating the track from the spectators. The car began rolling end over end for 80 meters, throwing Pierre Levay clear of his car and killing him instantly when his skull was crushed upon impact with the ground. The car careened into the dividing wall between the spectators and the track, bounced, and then disintegrated upon impacting a concrete stairwell as the flaming wreckage of the Mercedes slammed head-on into the packed grandstand. For another 100 meters, the car's engine block, radiator, and suspension continued forward, crushing anyone in its path, trailing only behind the hood of the car as it decapitated the tightly packed spectators like a guillotine. One survivor would later recount that just before the crash, a fellow spectator was standing beside him with a pair of binoculars slung around his neck. An instant later, he was still upright, still wearing his binoculars, only he no longer had a head. The rest of the car landed on the embankment, causing the fuel tank to rupture and explode. To make matters worse, the magnesium body was extremely flammable, causing what was left of the car to burst into flames, showering the crowd with white-hot burning metal and flaming gasoline. Emergency services were quickly overwhelmed. Ambulances raced to the scene, but the sheer number of casualties was beyond anything they had prepared for. This is because they tried to put out the fire with water, not knowing that when water meets burning magnesium, it creates hydrogen gas, which caused the fire to burn even hotter. It would be on fire for hours more. Despite expectations for the race to be red flagged and stopped entirely, in a decision that would be debated for decades to come, the race was ordered to continue ahead. Race officials claimed they feared stopping the race would cause chaos and block access from emergency exits. Others later cited financial motivations, such as the risk of lawsuit by teams participating in the race, and the requirement to refund entrance fees to 300,000 spectators, likely weighing in French racing authorities deciding to press on. As rescue workers battled flames and tended to the wounded and dying, cars continued to streak past over 100 miles per hour. At the time of the accident, Levay's co-driver John Fitch was ready to take over the car after the 35th lap and was standing with Levay's wife, Denise, who unfortunately saw the whole accident unfold firsthand. So Fitch remained with her until she could be comforted by first responders. Mercedes drivers and team manager Alfred Neubauer all agreed that they should withdraw from the race, since whether they won or lost, continuing would be a public relations nightmare. Unfortunately, Neubauer didn't have the authority to make that decision. They had to continue racing a full 6 more hours until company directors approved the withdrawals in an emergency meeting. Finally, around 1:45 a.m., Neubauer was able to order the team to call the cars into the pits and withdraw them from the race, despite the team being in first and third place at the time. 83 spectators had lost their lives, along with veteran driver Pierre Levay. More than 180 spectators were injured, many of them severely. It remains the deadliest accident in motorsport history to this day. Mercedes chief engineer visited the Jaguar pits to see if they would withdraw in solidarity, out of respect for the many victims. But Jaguar team's manager felt that Hawthorne would likely be the winner, so they decided to continue racing and secure the easy victory. The race ran its full duration, ending at 4 p.m. on Sunday, June 12th. As expected, without opposition, the winner was the Jaguar team, by a margin of 5 laps driven by Mike Hawthorne, the very car whose pit stop had set the deadly chain of events in motion. There was no victory celebration, and the podium ceremony was a subdued affair, overshadowed by the tragedy that had unfolded. Hawthorne, who was still distraught about the accident, was caught in an ill-timed photo by a French journalist, smiling and drinking post-race champagne. This led the French magazine L'Auto Journal to caption it with the bitter satirical caption, "À votre santé, Monsieur Hawthorne," to your health, Mr. Hawthorne. News of the disaster spread quickly. Headlines around the world screamed of the tragedy. Questions were immediately raised. How could this happen? Who was to blame? And why in God's name did the race continue? The sequence of events was scrutinized. Hawthorne's sudden deceleration, Macklin's evasive maneuver, LeVay's inability to avoid the collision, each played a part in the disaster. But perhaps the most damning factor was the track itself. The pit straight where the accident occurred had no barrier separating the track from the spectators. The slight elevation of the spectator area, intended to provide a better view, tragically put people directly in path of debris. In the wake of the disaster, Mercedes-Benz made a dramatic decision. They withdrew from all forms of motorsport, a self-imposed exile that would last for 3 decades. The impact rippled beyond Le Mans. Switzerland banned motor racing entirely, a ban that remains in effect to this day. Other countries, including Germany, France, and Spain, temporarily suspended racing events. But from this tragedy came change. The Le Mans disaster served as a wake-up call for the entire motorsports world. Car designs were modified to prioritize safety alongside performance. Fuel tanks were made safer to reduce the risk of fire. The use of highly flammable magnesium alloy in car construction was phased out. Driver safety equipment has undergone similar transformation. The open-faced helmets and simple overalls of 1955 have given way to sophisticated full-faced helmets, multi-layer fireproof suits, and devices like the Hans system to protect against head and neck injuries. At Le Mans itself, the tragedy is not forgotten. A memorial now stands at the site of the 1955 crash, and each year before the commencement of the race, a moment of silence is observed to remember those who lost their lives on that fateful day. Today, as cars once again race through the night at Le Mans, they do so on a track that bears little resemblance to its 1955 counterpart. Modern Le Mans features extensive runoff areas, sophisticated barrier systems, and carefully designed spectator zones. The famous Mulsanne Straight, once an unbroken 6-kilometer sprint, now features 2 chicanes to reduce speeds. The pit lane, site of the initial incident in 1955, is now separated from the main straight by a wall. The pit stops are carefully controlled, with speed limits strictly enforced. Yet, despite all these changes, the spirit of Le Mans endures. The race still runs for 24 hours, still pushes the boundaries of automotive technology, still captures the imaginations of hundreds of thousands of spectators. But now, they come with the reassurance that every possible precaution has been taken to ensure their safety. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining us on this journey through one of motorsport's darkest days. If you found this video interesting, feel free to subscribe and check out some of these other recommended videos as we dive into the worst disasters in history. See you next time on Ready, Set, Disaster.